Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever it is you're tuning in from, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Before I turn it over to your speakers for today, we just have a few housekeeping reminders that all participants are automatically placed on mute, but we do encourage you to ask questions by using that Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We'll answer as many questions as we can live, and we'll follow up on any questions we may not get to. This content will be recorded and sent out via email post-event. Now I'd like to introduce your moderator for today, Ed Bailey, Principal Technical Evangelist here at Cribl. Ed, over to you.
Thank you, Julie. I really appreciate it. Thank you for everyone's time. We're thrilled to have this discussion about the Cribl Lake and Amazon Security Lake. We have great experts in attendance with Perry and Mark, so it's going to be awesome. Holly, can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So you've already heard enough about me. So Perry, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Ed. I'm Perry Cribl. I've been with Cribl about 3.5 years from now, and I'm technical content manager. And what does that really mean? My goal is to generate content that's of value to our audience, whether it happens to be webinars like this or documentations or podcasts or videos. So basically, my customer is anybody listening right now.
Go, Perry. Mark, tell us about yourself.
Hey, my name is Mark Lüscher. I'm a senior solution architect from AWS. Boston-based. My focus is making our customers happy, but also observability. Observability means our log sources, security lake, a lot of Cribl.
Mark, you're being very, very, very modest. Mark has long experience in the industry working with observability and security data, so we're thrilled to have him here. Next slide, Holly. And this is the crux of the issue. Perry, could you share with the audience, why does this graph matter so much?
What's interesting about this graph and what it's really all about, it's about something why Cribl was actually formed. There's a fundamental tension between the growth of data and IT budgets, and we all know they're growing at totally different rates. What's kind of funny or interesting that if we were doing this presentation last year, that 28% growth would have been 27, and the year before that it would have been 26. So I'm thinking by next year it's probably going to be 30 because we're just getting more and more and more data out there. And the problem it creates is that how do I collect it all? How do I store it all? Where do I store it all? Which of this data do I need to look at? It's critical. It's actionable. Which do I need to save? Maybe just for compliance purposes, and which, if any, can I just ignore? And that's the whole problem. And as Ed is like you like to say a lot of times, is that there's a lot of data out there that's really uninteresting and really unimportant until it becomes the most important data in your network when an incident occurs or something happens. So this is the challenge we have. How do we keep up with this growth, and how do we analyze the right data?
You got it exactly right, Perry. And it's just an enormous challenge, because not only is it 20% this year, but it's then 28%, the compounding effect of 29, 30% plus that 28% next year. And it's on and on. This is the challenge that is not going to stop. Holly, can you go to the next slide, please?
So what you're going to see there, you can keep going ahead. It's going to triple really in 3 years, or double in 3 years. It's actually amazing.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Perry, can you go, let's talk about some of these challenges with this data?
Yeah, and I kind of touched on it before, is that there's large volumes of basically security, observability, IT, telemetry data, whichever you want to call it. And it's all extremely important, as I said, depending what I'm trying to do, depending on the use case. And it's all over the place. It's still on hosts, it's in data lakes, it's in platforms, it's in system of analysis. And you get to this point where it says, inconsistent data. What does that actually mean? It means I don't have a good way to look at it all in one holistic fashion. I got to look at this data, I have to look at this data, I have to look at this data. And maybe I've got a lot of different tools that looks at all this stuff. And I like this third one over here: inefficient use of data across inefficient use of data across use cases. And what that really comes down to is I've got a lot of data, it's spread over different places, and how do I take advantage of it in the smartest way? And then lack of direct control over process data. What do I do with the data? Once I process it, where does it go? Do I still have visibility? Do I lose visibility? Can I still access this data? And all four of these kind of mix together to actually create this mountain of data, extremely valuable data, but how do I get to the specific data that I need for a specific use case? Does that make sense, or too many words?
Makes total sense. I mean, when I was a customer, so much of it came down to my team was spending too much time getting data to my tools and not enough time getting value from my tools. We spend so much time, not only is it volume, but it's also the complexity and velocity of data. And it's a huge issue. And every team runs through this because without quality, clean, consistent data, it's going to be a real struggle to get value from your tools. And it all works together. Perfect sense, Perry. Holly, can you go to the next slide, please? We have a poll. So, Mark, Perry, what do you think? What would you answer to this question? What pain points do you most identify with when analyzing security data? Mark,
Mark,
you go
why don't you
first.
take the first shot? Yeah.
So I see the biggest challenge in growing volumes of security data, as you both mentioned before, because it's not only security data is growing, it's also you want to get more business insights. What that means is you're suddenly interested about application security logs. In the past, the infrastructure team didn't really care too much, but now with vulnerabilities in third-party software and so on, those elements become critical. And if you add all that up together with compliance requirements and other requirements, it just becomes a struggle which is difficult to solve.
You know, Mark, as Julie knows perfectly well, I don't do good on these polls. But to look at this, I take that a little bit different. The growing volumes of security data, I think everybody has that problem. But I think we actually, as far as this poll is concerned, that might be like table stakes, that everybody has that. And the one I think, to me, would be most inconsistent and incomplete data, because I don't know. I don't know if it's incomplete. You know, if I don't have a total holistic view of everything out there. So I think the third one kind of ties everything around in here. What do you think, Ed?
I got to grow in volumes of security data. I mean, from a first principle standpoint, it all starts there. Now, inconsistent, incomplete data, that is a huge issue. The volatility of IT security data, it can be maddening, but the amount of data is what's overwhelming. So is the poll complete, Julie? What do we got?
Let's check it out.
I guess there wasn't an all of the above, was there?
There we go. Yeah, look at that. Harry, one day you'll get it right.
Well, as I said, it's table stakes. I agree with it, but I was kind of going on a different path. But we're good.
But I totally get it, and it's such an issue. So, Mark, can you make some comments on this slide?
So definitely. So when AWS, Splunk, and 16 other partners launched OCSF, OCSF was a little bit more than a framework and a strong idea of some important partners. But as you can see, in August 23, the number went up already from 18 to 145. And the last time I counted in April, we were up to 182. Usually when you define a new normalization framework, it's always like, how big will be the market adaptation for that framework? Because that defines a little bit how many vendors will use it, and also ultimately how many customers will use it. With OCSF, I think AWS had to take a bet and say, we think that's the right way to do it. And we got confirmation now again at some conferences like RSA that really that was the right approach. And we have many vendors now which embed their solution already around the OCSF framework. Because they see the value of centralized data management. They can optimize query. And what is most important also, it allows to normalize the data in the OCSF format. So you always find the right information in the right fields. What also is the power of Amazon Security Lake, besides being OCSF based? Yeah, it's a fully managed service. but you can also use AWS and non-AWS tools like popular theme vendors and others to analyze the data inside Security Lake. Back to you, Ed.
Great. Hey, and I appreciate that. So just for maybe some of the uninitiated, what does OCSF stand for?
Open Cyber Security Framework.
Just a quick kind of explanation. Is it like a schema for a standardized schema for data so that different vendors can represent their data in the same way? Does that make sense?
I would say it's a correct understanding. So it's not one schema, it's one schema definition, and then you have different events. Like one event type can be authentication, one event type can be network access, and so on. So because OCSF is a newer standard, and we are currently in version 1.2, the standard is evolving because the more vendors are joining OCSF, the more systems or integrations will be required, which are not normalized yet. That means we have not defined them. So it's growing, and because it's growing, it gives the SOC or the users of OCSF just much more insights and more flexibility.
Mark, I got a question for you. I'm sorry, Ed.
But just one second. And I think it's really well said, Mark. And this is something that, when Perry and I were talking about yesterday in the last slide about volatile, incomplete data that OCSF tries to give you a standard way of looking across all your vendors. So I think it's a very powerful idea, and I'm glad that it's being brought to market. Go ahead, Perry.
Yeah, I was talking. A question for Mark is that obviously it's a year anniversary for Amazon Security Lake, and over that year, just wondering what use cases that you might have seen for Amazon Security Lake that maybe you weren't expecting a year ago?
It's a great question.
Well, I would say the buzzword of the year is Gen AI. And we see a tremendous amount of integrations of querying and finding patterns and leveraging Gen AI possibilities in helping analysts with vulnerability scanning, threat analytics, and so on. Another very important point, Perry, is we see more and more customers and vendors which are building their whole SOC and NOC solution around Security Lake. Whereas initially we thought Security Lake would be a very good mean to collect all AWS log files and also allow you to integrate non-AWS log sources. I think it came a little bit as a surprise for us that now Amazon Security Lake became the central piece for some of the critical ISV vendors out there, which are building their solution around that managed service.
Really neat. I'm really interested to see what happens in the future.
Definitely.
Holly, can we move on the next slide? Yeah, got another poll. I cannot wait. Let's see it. So how are you currently using Amazon Security Lake? Perry, you want to go first this time? What do you think?
I'm going for B.
There you go.
It's a comfortable, easy answer.
There you go.
I love it.
What do you think, Mark?
So the initial design goal of Amazon Security Lake is we wanted to simplify collection of all AWS log sources at a single place across all regions, across all accounts. And we wanted it to be a single click, meaning like once you have defined a policy, from then on, you get all your data in that single S3 bucket. What we realized is customers said there is much more to it. So I would agree with Perry that B is probably the starting point, but we are shifting to A, and the momentum of going to A is very strong.
I'm with Mark. I think it's like right in between A and B, where I bet you anything, 100% are AWS logs, but it rapidly getting to 50, 60% that are adding in non-AWS logs. So I think, Perry, we're all in alignment here.
Let's hope.
All right, let's check it out.
Oh,
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 what this
we're all
means is
wrong.
lots of opportunity, what I see.
Here we go.
I
Yeah.
agree. We have some work to do.
Absolutely right. And I think that's important. Making it easy, I think, is an underrated value of using a tool where it's just you find a policy and click a button and it just makes it simple. So, and I think over time, I think that to see a lot more adoption. So I'm interested to see how that changes. Holly, can you go to the next slide, please? So let's talk a little bit about this. So Perry, you want to start? Mark, you want to finish?
Okay.
Absolutely. And to the point that you were just making, Ed, is that, obviously when we're talking about products, new products, existing products, a lot of people try to talk about, the technical value of their product or their solution, where a lot of times the real value is simplifying. Make things easier for people, make common sense type stuff. So obviously collection, Mark had said before that the whole idea of Amazon Security Lake is that, a unified centrally managed collection strategy. But I'm going to kind of push it back on Mark here for just a second and say, Mark, do you want to collect everything in the Security Lake? Does everything belong in the Security Lake?
So that's an interesting one, Perry, because before joining AWS, I ran pretty much the SOC of a large healthcare company. And you need to find a balance between what is required. That means data you must collect because you're mandated to collect it. Then you have the data where you can get security insights, which are relevant for the SOC and some other teams. And then you need to decide what about data which has some security relevance, like DNS logs, proxy logs, S3 access logs. So what you pretty much need to define, and every company needs to define it for themselves, is what do I really need? What are my must-haves? What are my nice-to-have? And which data gives me sometimes information. And this data collecting is one hand, but the other challenge is then, and that's your fourth bucket, searching. Do I need to send the data to my SIEM? Or can I use simple search tools like Cribl search just to search the data inside my security lake for the 2, 3, 4 times a year when I need it?
That's a great answer, Mark, because what you did is you walked all the way through collection to optimization to storage right into search. And the whole idea is we do have to collect an enormous amount of data. And collection typically meant I'm going to bring it in and centralize it. But collection also could mean I just want to know where it is. And even if I'm leaving it on a host, if I have access to it, if I can search it, if I can visualize it, that's a value. But as you said before, I'm collecting all this data, and at some point it's going to go into some type of pipeline, and I'm going to optimize it. There's certain data that I know without a doubt this needs to go to my SIEM because it's valuable, it's critical, it's actionable. And then I'm going to make other decisions, whereas it says there in storage, maybe I'll put it in some type of lower cost storage. I'm not going to put everything can't be analyzed. So I want to put it somewhere else, or once again, leave it where it is. And that brings us to Cribl Lake. Cribl Lake is a source that I can act as a staging area that I can import everything to. But then from there, I can identify and spin it out. Some of it could go into Security Lake. Others can go to different types of storage. And that's where we got to that last point, search. As Cribl Search is, every vendor says that. It's like, hey, we got a great product. We have a unique product. But the unique thing about search is able to search data in place, which means I can search it on a host. I can search it in Amazon Security Lake. I can search it in an S3 bucket, or I can search it other places. And what I can do is I can search it not for just a partition or just a period of time. I could search it very, very granular to a period of time from a specific source address, a different data type or a specific data type going to a destination. And I can identify surgically very unique pieces of data, as you just said, for security purposes, and then forward those on to obviously into Security Lake if I want to store it in a certain bucket, or to a specific SIEM. So, and that's part of the whole retrieval process is I can pull back big chunks, or I can pull back very, very specific, surgically specific data sets.
So Perry, there's one point I want to make, and I think that's missing on the slide. because for me, one of the most powerful features of Cribl Stream is enrichment. And enrichment meaning that I can filter out what part of a data record I don't want. And for syslog data, we know that saves you about 30 to 40% of your space. But for us, what was most important is the enrichment part. Because if you're working, as an example, on AWS, you have to deal with those account IDs. Those account IDs are very nice numbers, which are not telling a lot to the SOC. If you can say, I can replace on the fly the account ID 12345 with, that's my hottest finance department application, and I get an alert from there, that is much more actionable. It gives me much more insights, and I have a better context.
That's a great point, because one of the other things that goes along with that, you were kind of, what your example was kind of internal to the organization, but external to the organization, I could use that for GeoIP type information. So if we know that there's certain areas of the world or certain IP addresses that are malicious, let's just say, I can identify those right off the bat and either filter them out or just identify them before they get to the security team. Ed, why don't you give some thoughts here?
Well, I think that's well said. And I think the overall arching theme is the choice of being able to put the right data with the right tools. Being able to decouple your detections from your analytics is critically important. So we got a couple of great questions from the audience. So first the question was, when I was at RSA, a Cribl employee told me that there was no query language for Cribl Lake, but I also hear there's search. Can you explain, Perry? You want to take that?
Yeah, okay. For Cribl Lake, obviously we're what was the right word? Format agnostic. That you can pretty much put your raw data in any format you bring with it. But what search does is actually search uses Kusto KQL type search language, and it has the ability to go in there and obviously search Cribl Lake for any specific data sets, or once again, Amazon Security Lake, S3, or a bunch of other buckets. So we actually use KQL. It's an open source. We actually have a hybrid of KQL, which we think makes it even simpler. I mean, if you've never used Cribl Search before and you log in at the very first time and you'll have a query bar in there, a lot of times you'll think, okay, what kind of magical KQL regex type scripting do I need to put in there? When in reality, all you have to do is almost put just natural language. I could just type my name, Perry, and it would search by default all my internal logs and find my name for that. And along with that, I'm glad you brought that up, Ed, because one of the things we've just released, it's brand new, it's still shiny, is actually something called Copilot, which will actually convert natural language to regex or to KQL in the search environment. So you can type in, hey, I want to find my VPC flow logs for the last 30 days. And it'll actually compile the KQL type script for that.
Yeah, and I think that's and for the person who is asking the question, I think the kind of the way to focus on it is most of the time you see commercial data lakes that are going to be using SQL as a query language. With the difference about Cribl Search is Cribl Search can also search outside the data lake, and that's why having something that's fairly neutral like KQL to give you value across many different data sets, not just Cribl Lake. Just one more question, then we're going to move on to the next slide. What benefits will we have using Cribl Lake compared to our internal data lake? So let's pretend for the purposes of this question, the user's writing their data to an S3 bucket. So what's going to be the difference between a raw user-owned S3 bucket and Cribl Lake?
Is that for me?
Yes.
I got a great answer for you. It depends on who manages that S3 bucket, that lake there, because in some organizations that's a different organization, and in order to make changes and in order to add another bucket, in order to access it maybe or change some of the policies, I have to open a ticket. I have to ask somebody else for that. With Cribl Lake, by default, it's there. If I need to create a new bucket, in all honesty, it's going to take me 3 clicks to actually do that. If I want to move data from a different resource, from an external S3 bucket or Azure or GCP or an API or even a host, I can actually flow that data directly into our Cribl Lake, set it up, and everything would work great. However, it's important to understand that Cribl Lake also has the ability to abstract other services or other systems that I can actually search anywhere I want to go. I can search other places, send it into Cribl Lake, and then forward it from Cribl Lake to Stream, refilter it, shape it. As Mark said before, I can basically add more capabilities, geo lookup, pretty much anything you want to do with it. And then identify just the specific data sets you want, the subsets of data, the specific information, and send those along the road. Does that answer the question, or did I drift off?
Mark, did you have, I don't want you to feel like you left out. Do you have anything, did you have anything to add?
No, I think I'm fine on that one.
So let's move on to the next slide, and then we'll answer a couple more questions later on. So I think this is a great way to lay out the idea of having a highly optional set of building blocks to get your data from your sources to your destinations. And I just want to emphasize that ability to, as we were mentioning before, being able to decouple your SIMs, your analytics platforms, and your data lake. And I really like how this is laid out, because you can get access to a lot more data sets. It can be more cost effective. And I really think the thing that should be emphasized is the ability to get access to better data. We talk so much about less data, but I think better data is what drives detections. Better data is what drives decision making. Better data is what drives case resolution. So I think that this is wonderfully laid out and clear about how you can mix and match what makes sense for your business. So Mark, let's start with you. So what do you think about this, and that how the solution mixed together in terms of data flow? I mean, back when you were a customer, what would be the attraction for something like this?
So back when I was a customer, where you have a Cribl Lake box, we had an S3 bucket. And luckily for us, we were able to manage that S3 bucket as part of the security team. That means we had the full life cycle of security data collecting till we send it and operate it to the SIEM under our control. Today, my approach would be a little bit different. I would say I need to separate structured data. Structured data would be data in the OCSF format in Security Lake, from raw data as it comes in from the connecting system. So what I would probably do is, still in the diagram, we have the sources, we have Cribl Stream. Cribl Stream now sends the data to Cribl Lake, which is still on AWS. Then from Cribl Lake, we would use Stream again to convert and massage the data to really give us the expected business outcome. And now we would probably forward all the data in the OCSF format to Security Lake, and then use native tools like Asina or other tools to query Security Lake. Would that mean we still need a SIEM? There might be use cases where a SIEM can still provide additional value, but having the flexibility to say I can send from Cribl Lake to whatever solutions I need to support would give me definitely a big advantage.
Harry, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I'm actually going to kind of take off something that Mark was saying before, as far as the solution here, is that a lot of vendors, and you look at this slide and you get Cribl Stream, Cribl Search, Cribl Edge, and Cribl Lake, and it's like, okay, what existing systems am I going to displace with this? And the truth is, in many, many, many cases, it's not. I'm augmenting those, because these systems that we have are down, they work in conjunction with the tools you have in place. Yeah, there might be some overlap in some different areas, but it definitely isn't. So if you look at here, and as Mark was saying before, I've got data flowing in from the left, and it could flow into Stream. And once it gets to Stream, I'm shaping it, I'm filtering it, I'm enriching it, I'm aggregating it, I'm compressing it, I'm masking it, I'm doing whatever I need to do. And then I've got to route it at the other end. And routing could go, I could send everything to one source. I could send things to 30 different sources, as Mark sent before. Some of the stuff I can go send to Cribl Lake, and I can use that maybe as a staging area. Maybe I'm going to flow a full fidelity copy of everything I do into Cribl Lake, while some of the other stuff coming out of Stream going to specific SIMs or specific tools that maybe I need to come back at the Cribl Lake at a later time if I get a new SIM, or if I want to run or wash that data again for another purpose, or an event comes up, I can do that. At the same time, Cribl Edge down the left, that's an intelligent agent. So if I don't want to centralize everything, I could take Cribl Edge and put it in a Kubernetes cluster, on containers, on a physical Unix host, Linux host, if I want to do that. And then Cribl search is kind of all-encompassing, is that if I need to go look for something, I could look at pretty much any one of the sources that's coming in. I can look at the destinations. I can look at the lake. I can look in Cribl Edge and find that unique piece of data. And to Mark's point, send it where it needs to go, whether that happens to be one piece of tooling or multiple pieces of tooling. So the whole idea is this is going to go and overlay 99% of the systems out there and just make the tools you have actually more efficient and work better.
Just to close it out, I think that idea, the ability to use Cribl Lake as a staging ground, because tools like Amazon Security Lake and other data lakes want very fixed, the right kind of data, and you don't want to have data that you're unaware of or data that you can't control. Putting data that's not going to exactly fit with the expected schema. So having the ability to stage, the ability to fit, the ability to cleanse data so that you're only putting the right kind of data into your security data fabrics and security data lakes just helps get more value from all your tools. So I think there's a big benefit there, and especially around the idea of choice and control. All right, so Holly, can we move on to the next slide, please? All right, so let's talk through this, a real world use case. Perry, you want to go through it?
Yeah, Interpublic Group, they obviously, like anybody, they had a lot of challenges. They were migrating from one environment, and they needed to basically clean up their data. They had multiple data sites, or excuse me, multiple, I guess we can call them silos or whatever, different areas where data is being managed. And they needed a way to centralize it without, how's a better way to do it? It's kind of exactly what you were just saying a minute ago. I need to bring it into one place where I can then filter it, for lack of a better word, and shape it and send it only where I needed to go. And that's the whole idea, is that they still wanted to retain control. They still wanted access to it. And that's an important point that I think I kind of really haven't touched on earlier, is that when I take that data, when the data comes in, and you're going to have a certain amount of data that you're going to archive. I have to save it for compliance reasons, just because I don't want to throw it away or whatever. And a lot of times when you're archiving this data, you're losing real-time visibility to it. I'm not quite actually saying it's going on tape decks like the days Ed and I were first involved in here, but it becomes difficult to access when it's needed. One of the nice things, and one of the things they appreciate, is the fact that you could store this data wherever you want, in Cribl Lake and somebody else's lake, for low cost, but I still have real-time visibility to it and the ability to actually search it now. I don't have to, if an incident occurs, I didn't have to wait 24 hours or whatever the SLA is to bring the data back and then examine it. I look at it at any point. So the data is coming in, I can stage it in one area, I can put it in one place, and then I can filter it the way I want, but then I'm always going to have visibility back into it and needed it.
I think it's a really great set of use cases, because first of all, migration is a massive challenge. Think about all the data when you migrate from one environment to another. One tool, you still need that data. So how are you going to get access to it when you've migrated from the tool? Also, your ability to migrate safely, I think, is incredibly important. And so having that shift of not only your SIEM architecture and your security data architecture, so that now you can make that shift, make it safely, and also still access all of your legacy data. I mean, too many of the people in the audience understand that you have retention requirements are going back, 6 months to a year, and for many of you, it's years, and you cannot easily shed old environments without that ability to move data around. And so this just it's a really good use case to give you that example of how you can improve yourself, make changes, yet still have access to the data that you need. Mark,
Ed, let me step on here before we get Mark back in. That was a huge point, because a couple of years ago, I didn't realize how often people migrate their systems. It's just unbelievable how they do. And a lot of times when they're migrating from one system to another, they want to try 2 or 3 or 4 other systems out first and see what it happens. And with Stream in the middle, I can actually split that data off, send it where they want, and actually they get the best choice. So, sorry. Back to Mark.
And also then just the safety. Migrating typically from big data platforms is a huge challenge, because too often it's a via con Dios moment where you're just a hard cutover and you're hoping for the best. And the ability to keep your old platform and your new platform running, and being able to feed your production data sets to both at the same time, gives you that ability to tell your leaders that, we're gonna have a fallback. We're going to have a measure of safety. We've done our QA testing. So you have a lot more confidence than otherwise possible to know this is going to work. So Mark, we keep teasing you. So now what do you think?
So in my previous job, I think the biggest challenge was in a healthcare industry, which is operating around the world. You need to be compliant with a lot of legal and privacy requirements. So we had to break out all our data silos in 5 regions, which pretty much were into 5 continents. And then we had to apply different retention settings depending on which region and what kind of data. In short terms, without the use of Cribl, Stream, and a centralized bucket, it would have been impossible to manage. The only option we would have had is send everything into the theme and keep everything for a very, very long time, which, coming back to Perry's first slide, would not only be a 7% increase in IT budget, it would probably have been a 50 to 70% increase in IT budget. So it's having the flexibility to really go through the data and decide how you want to keep the data and for how long you want to keep the data at a cheap, secure option is definitely very important. Back to you, Ed.
Yep, totally got it right. So we got a couple more questions here. So Mark, I noticed that you answered one of the first questions. So can you go over that and just kind of share your answer? Because I thought it was a really good answer.
So that was, I think the question was, when would you use Cribl search versus when would you use a more traditional search tool like Splunk? And my answer was, for less critical data, that means data which you don't really need right away, I would use Cribl search also because it allows me to search decentralized, meaning I can search in AWS, in Google, and in Azure, and at the edge at the same time. Versus for security relevant data or use cases, I would still continue to use tools like Splunk and have the data ingested into Splunk.
I think that's a great answer. And also one thing I wanted to illuminate for the class, you said searching the edge. What does that mean?
So searching the edge is Perry mentioned Cribl Edge. Cribl Edge means that you can have an agent installed on servers. And instead of collecting all that data and sending to a centralized place, you can say, let me reach out to all the clients where that software is installed and see if the data I'm looking for is there. And that's pretty much searching at the edge.
Let me tack on one other thing to that, because what you just said was 100% correct, but it also, Cribl Search, not only does it search in place, it has a federated search in place. So I could look at one edge device, dozens or hundreds or essentially thousands if I'm looking for, find a specific information, a specific signature, a specific IP address. We have the ability to do that, to search across the spectrum. So whether it happens to be multiple data lakes, whether it happens to be edge hosts, whether it happens to be API endpoints, I can search them all simultaneously, aggregate that information, and then maybe if it happens to be an edge device that I was searching and looking for, from search itself, I can actually jump right into that host and maybe do some further investigation.
Yeah, it's a pretty exciting capability. It's something I really appreciate. And just to add on a little bit about Cribl Search, that flexibility to search in place, which is huge. Imagine you have an object storage bucket that's full of hundreds of terabytes of some sort of audit data that without something like search, you would have to move that data into your SIM and to another search tool, which would be enormously time consuming and expensive. Where with Cribl search, you have the ability to point it right at the object storage and search it as is. I think that takes so much of the friction away from incident response, because we all have these data stores that we just can't have effective access to because of the size of the data. So it just unlocks the potential of that data so much.
Ed, that's a huge point. And I want to actually reiterate what you just said, because a lot of times when I'm presenting to people, they kind of miss that point, that they're so comfortable with the idea of collect and then search. The idea of search and then collect is kind of, it's not intuitive at all. And essentially what we'll do is, use a S3 as an example. We will spin up compute resources in Amazon to actually search that data where it happens to be sitting, in the bucket it's in the partition it is, and we'll identify what we're looking for. At that point, you have that data now on your screen. It's visible to you, and you can decide what you want to do. Do I want to move some of that somewhere else? Do I want to do a more refined search? But once again, I haven't moved that stuff at this point, and that's something a lot of times people miss. Even though they hear search in place, they don't actually realize we're actually sending the compute to where the data is instead of bringing the data to where the compute is.
Just working with a customer, and they had, what was it? They had 700 terabytes of audit data sitting in an S3 bucket, and they needed to go through it. And they had something going on, and they came to us to try to figure out, how do we move this data into our SIM? And I think that they were really surprised when we were able to say, you don't need to move it. And within the call, we were able to get a cloud instance provisioned and get them attached and searching that data. And just that ability, and I think the focus is removing the friction that you ordinarily have to experience. Everyone's been through it. You have an incident, you have a question, you have a case, and you don't have the data you need to answer these questions. So now you have to go find the data. Now you have to collect it. Now you have to process the data, index the data, and that can take an enormous amount of time and expense. And so just making so much of that go away, I think, is very key. Mark, you have any experiences to share with something like that, of why that's valuable?
Not really in that case, Ed.
So we got another question. I think it's a really good one. It said IT ops teams often find they cannot quickly and easily access logs in real time because all the logs are going to the SOC and the SIM, and they have to ask permission to access that data. Any thoughts on what logs, on how you can get those logs to go to IT ops and more generally make the data more accessible?
Can I say Cribl Lake?
I think you can say a lot of things. Hey, but we're not hearing from Mark. So Mark, what do you got to say?
Has been a big challenge in my previous company, because some of the log sources were considered company secret source, and whatever is in there was critical. But if you don't get information to those log sources, you cannot operate the systems where the secret source is produced. So it was a bit of catch-22. Ultimately, what we had to do is we used Cribl stream, and we had to break out pretty much the destinations, and we sent one destination to the SIEM, and we duplicated some event types into a searchable audit log on an S3 bucket, so the IT ops team at least had something they could look at without impacting the security of the overall system.
I've run into this several times. I never forget, we had an M&A, and I go into the organization, and they said, yeah, we don't share our Windows security logs nor our firewall logs with the ops team. They have to ask permission to see them. And I have this vision of the network engineer trying to make a firewall change or trying to debug a firewall, having to ask permission, and just the absolute insanity that is. And so that's exactly what we did. Was we were able to use Stream to split that data, so that the 1% of it that was security only, we made sure that went to the security indexes, and the rest of it also was shared with IT ops, because I think it's critical. Everybody needs data to do their job, and denying teams access to data they need their job is just counterproductive, is the nicest way I can say it. So Let's see. Do we have any other questions? Let's see. We have one more question here as well. Oh, we got a lot more questions. All right. In Cribl Lake, can I have separate retention and access policies by log source? Harry, you want to take that?
Sure, absolutely you can. When you identify, when you create a data set would be like a partition, a bucket, so to speak. Each one of those you have an option of saying 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever length of time is appropriate for that, and you just make sure you flow the data into the right bucket. So it's pretty easy to do that.
Yeah, totally. All right, so we have another question. If I'm an ISV and I'm managing logs for multiple customers in a single Cribl Lake, how would you make that work? Do we have multi-tenancy? Do we have multi-access capabilities in Cribl Lake?
I don't believe we have multi-tenancy yet, but actually that's on the roadmap for later this year. But you can still separate that out, and you can set RBAC type rules of who can see what data. So you can create different data sets and apply different access rules for those to prevent any cross pollination between the two data.
Yeah, we're about to release some multi-tenancy in a Cribl stream, and I think that's an example where by breaking out the tenancy there and then having separate destinations inside a Cribl Lake, that's going to give you that ability to split up your data and be able to show your customers that you're not mixing the data and that you have access controls between the different buckets of customer data. So I think that's a real powerful thing for an ISV, because you're going to be able to manage that data safely and effectively and efficiently, and for your customers. See what else we got. I said, does Cribl support working on AWS private link, Cribl Cloud instances deployed and then accessible by use via VPC endpoints, so we're not leaving the AWS global infrastructure? Perry, Mark, you know the answer to that question?
I can answer that one. So as of today, the answer is no. You have the option to also implement Cribl Stream on-prem in the customer account, in a customer AWS managed account. And in that case, you can use it. But for the cloud offering, as of today, it's not supported.
Okay. That's really good. And then also let's look at set, and we have one more question about, so let's do some comparisons between the benefits of Cribl Stream versus Kafka. It's not exactly Cribl Lake, but let's just, Perry, can you go ahead and answer that question real quick, or do you want me to?
Yeah, why don't you take that, Ed? Because I think you've worked more with Kafka than I have.
Yeah, I mean, the basic examples is that Kafka is going to excel at getting data from point A to point B, and it does it really well. It does it reliably with resilience, and it does it quickly. Where Cribl Stream does the same thing, but the big difference is going to be Cribl Stream is going to be significantly easier to use. It's also going to be significantly easier to manipulate your data. So you're going to be able to change formats, features, remove data, and especially enrich data. And that becomes a real challenge, especially with open source Kafka, and in terms of usability, in terms of skill sets. And so a lot of it is, it's not that you couldn't do all these things with enough work in Kafka, but how much engineering time and skill do you have to put towards Kafka, where you can get that done a lot quicker in Cribl. And so, and if you have more questions, please, I'm in the community Slack if you want to talk about this some more than happy to. All right, and then we also have another. So when is multi-tenancy in Cribl Stream planned for GA? I believe that's coming up within the next 30 to 60 days, I think. Do you know, Perry?
I think, yeah, this summer.
Yeah, so that should be relatively quickly. We also, and Maria, I'll answer your questions offline. So we have any other questions? Really appreciate everyone's involvement, engagement. We're in the community Slack. If you want to talk about these things some more, feedback is a gift. We definitely want to hear about it. Perry, so you just want to close this out and give us some overall, then Mark?
Sure. Once again, Cribl's all about being agnostic and leveraging your existing tools and allowing you choice. If you want to use an S3 bucket, great. If you want to use Amazon Security Lake, great. You want to use some of your existing other tools, you want to use your existing sims. We're never going to tell you to displace those or get rid of them. What we're going to do is show you we have options that allow you maybe to optimize that environment and actually use it better. And my final, I'm going to put my marketing hat on just for a minute. If you guys want to talk to Ed and me some more, we're going to be at CribbleCon next week in Vegas. Weather should be great. So please, if you're going to be in that area, come on out and visit us.
Mark, what do you got to say?
So I think I want to conclude by the combination of Cribl and Security Lake is probably the best approach for a lot of the customers. It's not an or, it's the combination, the and or, which pretty much gives you the advantages you need to have and makes implementation of a very good logging solution just seamless.
Hey, that sounds great. I really appreciate that. Come on out to CribbleCon. We're real excited to be there June 10th in Vegas. We're going to be at Caesars. Also, if you're in the area, we're going to be having live demos, and I'm also going to be doing strategy and architecture sessions at the Win on Tuesday and Wednesday. So looking forward to hearing from everyone. Come on by, tell us what you think. We're always want to hear your ideas, and we're really looking forward to it. Mark, wish you were going to be there. We got to get you to CribbleCon.
Well, guess what? I'm in Vegas this week.
Oh, there you go. Hey, it's going to be awesome. Really appreciate it. Thank you for everyone for joining.